The Sterling family study always smelled of old money and hypocrisy. It was the smell of aged oak polished with imported beeswax. The smell of leather-bound books that had never been opened. And today, it also reeked of greed. I stood leaning against the bookshelf in the farthest corner of the room, my familiar position in this house, an outsider, a faint shadow.
Around the massive mahogany table, my wife's family sat with the posture of predators waiting to divide the kill. Elena, my mother-in-law, was dabbing a lace handkerchief to her dry eyes. She played the grieving widow role perfectly, if you ignored the fact that she had secretly asked for the villa's selling price last week. Julian, my precious brother-in-law, sat shaking his leg, unable to hide his impatience. He constantly glanced at the flashy gold Rolex on his wrist, as if counting down every second until he was released from this charade. And Sarah, my wife, she sat huddled in her chair, eyes looking down at the floor. She hadn't looked at me once since we entered this room. Her silence was the loudest sound in this room. The elderly lawyer, who had served the Sterling family for the past 30 years, cleared his throat. The rustling of paper sounded like a razor blade on glass. "Let us begin," he said, his voice monotone, lacking the respect usually shown when Grandfather Arthur was alive. According to the last will and testament of Mr. Arthur Sterling, my heart did not beat faster. It beat slower, heavy, like a hammer striking an anvil in the machine shop. I knew what was coming. I had seen the triumphant look in Elena's eyes when she walked out of the lawyer's office last week. I leave all shares in Sterling Auto Group, including the showroom chain and service workshops. The lawyer paused, pushing his glasses down his nose. To my only grandson, Julian Sterling. Julian slammed his hand on the table, a rude sound shattering the solemn atmosphere. "Excellent," he exclaimed, a smirk spreading across his childish face. "Go on. What else?" "The villa, the bank accounts, and the art collection belong to Mrs. Elena Sterling." Elena exhaled, her shoulders relaxing, the tension vanishing, replaced by naked satisfaction. "And the portion for Aaron and Sarah?" Julian asked, his tone mocking, turning fully to look at me. The lawyer flipped to the last page. "For Aaron, who has devotedly served the family, I leave my sincere thanks and a wish of good luck for the future. The end. Not a dime. Not a single share. Not even a small keepsake." The entire room was silent, but I could hear the snickering inside Julian's head. "A wish of good luck," Julian repeated, laughing out loud. The old man really knew how to joke at the last minute. He stood up, walking toward me with the swagger of a new boss. "Did you hear that clearly, brother-in-law? You got your good luck. Now you can get out of my company. I don't need a grease-stained mechanic dirtying the luxurious image of the new showroom. I looked straight into his eyes. His eyes were cloudy with alcohol and ignorance. He knew nothing about operations. He knew nothing about the nights I stayed up white to fix his stupid mistakes in the books. "I will go," I said, my voice strangely calm. "But what about grandfather's car? The Shelby GT 500? Julian's smile vanished for a second, then returned more twisted. "That pile of scrap metal? The thing that killed the old man?" He waved his hand as if swatting away an annoying fly. "I called the scrapyard this morning. They will come to crane it away in an hour. Crush it. Dispose of it. I don't want to see it anymore. It gives my mother nightmares." Elena nodded in agreement, her eyes sharp as razor blades. "That's right. Get rid of it, as far away as possible. Don't let anyone see it." A cold current ran down my spine, not because of their cruelty towards Arthur's final memento, but because of that suspicious haste. Why crush a classic car worth millions of dollars, even if it was in an accident? Why not sell the wreck to a collector? Why dispose of it immediately after renouncing the will? Grandfather Arthur was a master driver. He never lost control on that familiar road. Unless there was something on that car they didn't want anyone to find. I looked at Julian, then at Elena. The satisfaction on their faces couldn't hide the fear lurking in the depths of their eyes. They were hiding something, and a mechanic's intuition told me that the answer lay in that pile of scrap metal they called trash. I clenched my fist in my pocket, feeling the calluses on my thumb. "Fine," I said. "Congratulations, Julian. I hope you run the company as well as you spend money." I turned and walked out of the study. I didn't look at Sarah. I knew she wouldn't follow me. She had chosen her side, the side of safety and cowardice. I walked out of the magnificent mansion, taking a deep breath of the cold winter air. They thought they had gotten rid of me. They thought they had won. But they made a fatal mistake. They underestimated a mechanic's love for machines. And they forgot one thing Grandfather Arthur once taught me. The biggest secrets are not in the safe, Aaron. They lie in places where amateurs never bother to look. I pulled out my phone, dialing the familiar number of old Joe's scrapyard. "Joe, keep that Shelby for me. I'm buying it. At any price." I drove my old pickup truck away from the flashy Beverly Hills. The engine groaned as if empathizing with its owner's heart. 10 years. I had dedicated 10 years of my life to that family. Not for money, but because of a promise to Grandfather Arthur. I remember the first time I met him. Back then, I was just a young apprentice mechanic in Sterling Auto's service workshop. Arthur, the chairman of the corporation, came down to the workshop himself, not wearing a suit, but wearing grease-stained overalls. He was struggling with the carburetor of a 1965 Ford Mustang. "Boy," he called me, holding a wrench, "why do you think this horse won't neigh?" I trembled, but I spoke my mind. "Sir, The mixture ratio is too lean. You need to adjust the air screw. He looked at me, his eyes shining under bushy eyebrows. He handed me the wrench. Do it. I did. And the engine roared to life, powerful and crisp like rock and roll music. Arthur patted my shoulder, his hand heavy and warm. Well done. Only grease-stained hands can understand the soul of machines, son. Those people sitting in the cold room up there, he jerked his chin toward the glass office where Julian was playing video games. They only see soulless numbers. Since that day, I became the only person in the family truly close to him. Not Julian, the spoiled grandson. Not Sarah, the timid granddaughter. But me, the poor grandson-in-law. Every weekend, we would retreat into his private garage. There were no dry financial reports there. Only the sweet smell of gasoline, the sound of metal clinking, and stories about the golden age of the automotive industry. He taught me how to listen to the engine to diagnose it. He taught me to respect every single screw. And more importantly, he taught me how to read people. Aaron, he once said, as we were polishing the dark blue Shelby GT 500, his greatest pride, this family is rotting from the inside. Elena is too ambitious. Julian is too lazy. I worry that when I lie down, what I built will be torn apart and sold cheap by them. I remained silent, not daring to comment on my wife's family. He stopped his hand, staring at the glove box on the dashboard. He had modified its latch, a complex mechanism that only he knew how to open. I have prepared a backup plan, he whispered, his eyes distant. An emergency brake. If one day everything goes off track, look to this car, Aaron. It is not just a vehicle. It is the final bunker of truth. At that time, I didn't fully understand his meaning. I just thought he was talking about the collectible value of the car. But now, piecing everything together, I shuddered. A month ago, the accident happened. It was a night of torrential rain. The police said Arthur lost control at the death curve on Canyon Pass. The Shelby plunged down the cliff, shattered. Arthur died on the spot. When I got the news, I rushed to the scene like a madman. But Julian and Elena were there first. They blocked me. "Don't come near," Elena screamed, her face pale but tearless. "The police are working. Do you want to contaminate the scene?" They didn't let me see his face one last time. They hurriedly took the body for cremation the very next day. And the car was towed to a secret warehouse, all access forbidden. They said it was to serve the investigation. But the investigation conclusion was issued so quickly it was ridiculous. Accident due to old age and poor health. I knew Arthur. He drove even steadier than professional racers. He never drank alcohol when driving, and that Shelby was maintained by my own hands every week, the braking and steering systems absolutely perfect. Something was wrong. Very wrong. And today, Julian's hasty action to sell the car wreck confirmed my suspicion. My pickup turned onto the muddy dirt road leading to Old Joe's scrapyard. Towers of old cars stacked on top of each other like giant metal graves. The smell of rust and waste oil hit my nose, familiar and comforting. Joe, the scrapyard owner, a large man with a gray beard, was waiting for me. Behind him was the Shelby GT 500, or what was left of it. It lay flattened on the ground, distorted, pathetic. The hood was folded like crumpled paper. The windshield was shattered, but the dark blue paint remained, glittering faintly under the evening sun. "You came just in time, Aaron," Joe said, spitting tobacco onto ground. "Your brother-in-law called to rush me to crush it 3 times in the last 15 minutes. He seems very afraid of this pile of iron existing for another second." I walked closer to the car. My heart tightened seeing the driver's seat where Arthur had taken his last breath. There were still dark, dried bloodstains on the torn leather upholstery. I placed my hand on the cold flank of the car. "Hello, old friend," I whispered. "Sorry for coming late." "How much, Joe?" I turned to ask. "Julian said sell it for scrap price, $500, Joe shrugged. "But I know its value to you."
And I also know you are broke. Give me $600. Consider it storage fee. I pulled out my wallet. It was all the cash I had left after being kicked out of the house. I gave the money to Joe. "Thanks, Joe. You don't know what you just helped me save." "I don't need to know," Joe patted my shoulder. "Just looking at how you look at this wrecked car, I know it's more important than life. I'll help you crane it to your garage."
But hurry, before Julian changes his mind. We worked in silence. When the Shelby was safely placed on the tow truck bed, it had started to get dark. I drove toward the shabby suburbs, where I rented a tiny garage as a temporary shelter. The night wind blew through the broken window, freezing cold. But inside me, a fire was burning. The fire of hope and the fire of revenge. I looked in the rear-view mirror at the twisted mass of metal behind. Grandfather Arthur had left me a puzzle, and tonight I would start decoding it with the very grease-stained hands he once cherished, starting with that jammed glove box. My garage was a dilapidated warehouse nestled in an abandoned industrial zone. It was cold, damp, and reeked of engine oil mixed with rust. But to me, this was a sanctuary. The Shelby GT 500 lay in the center, like a wounded beast waiting to be healed. I turned on the yellow filament bulb. The weak light illuminated the horrific dents on the car body. I began my work, not with haste, but with reverence. I removed every single screw, wiped every machine detail. The sound of metal clinking, clangs. I pictured what was happening at the Sterling mansion. Surely they were throwing a party. Expensive champagne corks were popping. Julian was putting his arms around greedy partners, laughing about the prospect of selling the showroom for cash. Elena was calculating how many new pieces of jewelry she would buy. They were celebrating on the corpse of Arthur's legacy. That thought made my blood boil, but my hands remained absolutely calm. I focused on the dashboard on the passenger side. It was heavily deformed after the head-on collision.
The glove box was jammed tight, the warped metal edge wedged firmly into the car frame. A normal person would use a crowbar to pry it open, but I knew if I did that, Arthur's secret locking mechanism would automatically destroy what was inside. He was a mechanical genius, and also a paranoid man. I used a small dipstick, bending the tip. I slid it into the narrow gap between the box lid and the frame. I closed my eyes.
I didn't use my eyes to see. I used my hands to feel. I listened for the tiny click of the latches inside. 1 latch, 2 latches, 3 latches. Sweat poured down my forehead, dripping onto the cold concrete floor. My fingers went numb from holding one position for too long, but I didn't dare breathe heavily. Just 1 millimeter wrong, and the lockbox would jam forever. Click.
The sound of the final latch opening sounded sweeter than any symphony. The glove box lid slowly popped open. Inside, there were no car papers, no cash, only a dark yellow envelope carefully sealed with red wax, and a tiny SD memory card taped with black tape to the inside of the lid. I picked up the envelope. On it was Arthur's shaky but familiar handwriting. For Aaron, the only one worthy. I tore open the envelope.
Inside was a handwritten will. The date written on it was the day he died. It had his signature and the seal of an independent notary office I had never heard of. I scanned the content. My tears welled up, hot and salty. He had left everything to me. Not because I was his grandson-in-law, but because I was the only one who understands that the value of a business lies in people, not in profit.
But this will would be meaningless without evidence proving the old will was forged or coerced. I picked up the memory card. I plugged it into the old laptop on the grease-covered workbench. The screen lit up. A single video. I pressed play. Images from the dashcam facing inside the car appeared. Wide angle, covering both the driver's seat and the passenger seat. Arthur was sitting in the driver's seat, his face tired and angry.
Julian and Elena were standing outside the car door, leaning in. "Sign it, old man!" Julian screamed, his face twisted with greed. "Sign this transfer paper now! We need money to pay debts!" "Never!" Arthur shouted back, gripping the steering wheel tight. "I know you plan to sell the company. I won't let you destroy my life's work." Elena cut in, her voice hissing like a venomous snake. If you don't sign, we will forge the signature.
You are old. Who would believe you are still lucid? I'm going to see my lawyer right now, Arthur said, starting the car. I will change the will. I will kick you and your son out onto the street. He stepped on the gas. The car rushed away. The video continued recording. Arthur drove in a state of agitation. He muttered to himself, "Must protect Aaron, must protect Aaron." And then, at the sharp turn,
A loud explosion rang out from the front wheel. The car lost control. The camera spun wildly. The sound of metal crashing. The sound of breaking glass. And then, a pitch-black screen. I sat frozen in front of the computer screen. That explosion sound was not a normal tire blowout. I rewound that part. I put on headphones, turning the volume up to the maximum. It was the explosion sound of a small detonator.
Or an interference with the braking system. They didn't just force him to sign. They had sabotaged the car to ensure he never reached the lawyer's office. They had killed him. This truth would not only help me regain the assets, it would send the entire Sterling family to prison for murder. I closed the laptop. I looked at the clock. 8 a.m. Today was the showroom merger signing ceremony. Julian would sell the company at 9 a.m.
I stood up, brushing dust off my clothes. I didn't change into any fancy suit. I still wore these grease-stained mechanic overalls, because this was my uniform. I grabbed the file and the memory card. It was time to teach them a lesson about a wish of good luck. 3 months later, the Sterling Auto sign had been taken down. Replacing it was a new sign, simple but solemn: Arthur's Garage and Heritage. I didn't turn this place into a flashy showroom. I turned it into a classic car restoration center and a small museum honoring grandfather. I was sitting in the Shelby GT 500. It was no longer scrap metal. I had spent 3 grueling months working 18 hours a day to restore it.
Every dent had been hammered flat. The dark blue paint was newly coated, shiny as a mirror. The V8 engine roared, deep and powerful, like the heartbeat of a beast just awakened. I ran my hand over the new leather dashboard. My finger stopped at the glove box lid, the place that kept the secret that changed my life. Sarah sent divorce papers last week. She didn't demand anything. Maybe that was the last bit of self-respect left.
Julian and Elena were waiting for their court date. Lawyers said that with evidence from the memory card and the car, traces of explosives were found. They would be in prison for a very long time. I didn't feel gloating. I just felt relieved. I looked up at the blue sky through the windshield. "I did it, Grandfather Arthur," I whispered. "I kept my promise." I put it in gear. The car lunged forward gently, rolling out of the garage.
I drove it along the Pacific Coast Highway. The sea breeze slapped my face, carrying the salty taste of freedom. I remembered his words in the video. "I will protect Aaron."
He had protected me, even when he was no longer here. And now I would protect his legacy. Not by making a lot of money, but by keeping true values from being forgotten. Legacy is not what you leave in the bank. Legacy is what you keep in the trust of others.
And in the glove box of this old car, I stepped on the gas. The Shelby rushed away, leaving behind the painful past, rushing straight towards the open horizon.